The late afternoon light spilled through the lace curtains of my father's old dining room, stretching across the oak table that had carried decades of meals, arguments, and reluctant gatherings. I sat at the far end, the same chair I'd been pushed into for years, as if my place was predetermined. The house still bore his presence, his books on the shelves, his careful penmanship in framed notes on the wall, but the authority within these walls no longer belonged to him. It belonged to my mother, Brielle. She set a porcelain cup in front of me with the precision of a dealer laying down a losing card. Steam coiled upward, carrying the bitter fragrance of dark roast. Her lips curved in a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ungrateful brat," she muttered, not loudly enough for it to echo through the whole room, but pointed enough for it to slice through me. Then, with the kind of disdain that felt rehearsed, she added, "You wouldn't last a week without this house." My fingers curled around the cup, not for warmth, but for composure. Inside, something twisted, the familiar sting of humiliation making itself at home. Yet I kept my face steady. Years of surviving her barbs had taught me that reacting only sharpened her claws. Pain had learned to wear restraint in my body, and tonight was no exception. The silence stretched, and for a moment the only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I inhaled slowly, letting the coffee's heat fog my glasses for a second. A fog, I thought, was better than letting her see the tears that always threatened when she cut me down. I had heard these words before. Ungrateful. They had been hurled at me since adolescence, like a label stitched to my skin. I was 15 the first time she spat it with conviction. I had been offered a scholarship to a university 3 states away, something that thrilled me. But instead of pride, she looked at me with contempt. Ungrateful, she said then, because wanting to leave this house, to seek my own life, meant betraying her sacrifices. Or at least that's how she painted it. Even now, at 32, the sting felt fresh. She hadn't stopped saying it. No matter how hard I worked, how much I earned on my own, the word returned like a drumbeat. I paid my own bills, kept my career afloat, and never leaned on her financially. Yet she erased those facts as easily as she erased my name from conversations where she boasted about her children. It was easier to dismiss me than to admit I had built something without her approval. I looked down at the cup in front of me, the liquid swirling gently from my slight tremor. I couldn't help but think how strange it was that she used the same insult now as she had when I was a girl. Time had passed, but in her eyes, I hadn't grown at all. Before I could gather my thoughts, her voice shifted, its venom curving into sugar. She turned toward my brother-in-law, Marcy Noir, who sat upright, his shoulders back like a man who knew exactly how welcome he was here. "Now here's a man who knows gratitude," Brielle said, her tone rising with pride. She reached to pat his hand. "A real blessing to this family." I followed her gaze, noting how his eyes glimmered with satisfaction. Elrena, my older sister, leaned into his arm, her lips forming a smug smile. The message was clear. In this family, gratitude wasn't measured by actions, but by loyalty to Brielle's narrative. And in that story, I was the villain. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth to stop myself from speaking too quickly. I felt like a guest in my own home, I admitted to myself silently, the weight of invisibility pressing on my chest. Invisible, yet present enough to be shamed. It reminded me of something I once read in a memoir. It felt like I was paying rent in my soul to stay in a family that never saw me as one of theirs. That line had stayed with me because it described perfectly the role I had always played here. Brielle's laughter at something Marcy said cut across the room, sharp as knives against porcelain. Every word between them wasn't just conversation, it was performance. And I, seated at the end of the table, was the unwilling audience. I stirred the coffee with deliberate slowness, letting the spoon clink against the rim. Marcy caught my eye across the table and allowed himself a tiny smirk, as if my discomfort was his entertainment. He leaned back casually, savoring the favor he basked in. In my line of work, I thought, I learned silence is not weakness, silence is strategy. It was something I had come to live by in both courtrooms and family rooms. The principle was the same. You let people reveal themselves. I didn't raise the cup to my lips. Instead, I traced the rim with my finger and breathed in the steam, calculating. Their expectations were simple: for me to shrink, to sip, to vanish into the background. But every second I withheld gave me control. A quote by Maya Angelou surfaced in my mind, one I had clung to in difficult moments. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. My mother had shown me, over and over, who she was. So had Marcy. The performance tonight was only confirmation. The conversation around me blurred into a chorus of empty pleasantries. My mother gushed over Marcy's new real estate deal. Elrina chimed in about how he carried himself like a true provider, and I remained silent, my coffee untouched. The sound of their voices blended with the ticking clock, each word building tension like kindling waiting for a spark. If she called me ungrateful now, what else was she planning? What punishment was I meant to endure next? The insult was not just habit, it was a signal. Marcy's stare lingered on me longer than casual, his smirk deepening when he saw I hadn't drunk. Something in his expression unsettled me, like an actor waiting for his cue. I shifted in my chair, steadying my breath. It wasn't just coffee she served me, I thought, tightening my grip around the cup. It was a warning, wrapped in steam and bitterness. I held the cup a little closer after my mother's barb, the steam rising and wrapping around my face like a veil I didn't ask for. My hand trembled slightly, though not from weakness, more from the tension straining through me. The smell was off. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, a consequence of her words that still clung to me like wet fabric. But as I drew in the aroma, something unsettled me. It wasn't the bitterness of dark roast alone. There was a sharp undertone, faint but distinct, the kind that stuck in the back of your throat. My mother chattered idly, asking Elrina if she had reminded Marcy to call the insurance company. "Don't let things slip," she said, as though her daughter was managing a household empire. Elrina laughed softly, brushing her hair behind her ear as if she were the favored child in a painting. I stirred my cup, watching the swirl of liquid, pretending to listen, but locked in on that peculiar smell. "Azariah," Brielle said suddenly, her voice flat. "Why aren't you drinking?" I forced a smile, one I hoped conveyed indifference. "I'm letting it cool." Her eyes lingered a moment longer, then she returned to her small talk. But unease had already taken root in me. It wasn't just coffee. The faint, almond-like scent nudged a memory from my college days. I could see myself sitting in a lecture hall, second row, notebook open. My chemistry professor had leaned forward with a kind of gravity professor's reserve for their warnings. "If you ever smell bitter almonds, trust your instincts. Cyanide." Most people couldn't detect it, he had explained, but for those who could, it was unmistakable. The memory left a chill despite the warmth of the cup. I inhaled again, careful, trying to determine if I was imagining things. Maybe it was just stale beans. Maybe the cup hadn't been rinsed well. Maybe stress was making me paranoid. But the sharper side of the aroma didn't vanish no matter how I rationalized it. My heart pressed against my ribs. Was I losing my mind? Or was this the culmination of months of subtle manipulations? My mother insisting I was ungrateful, my sister aligning with Marcy, the way Marcy had watched me too closely whenever finances or inheritance were mentioned. The possibility burned through me. I shook my head slightly, forcing calm. Logic was my ally, paranoia my enemy. I told myself I had to balance them carefully. If I drank, I risked more than humiliation. If I refused, I exposed my suspicion too soon. When I finally lifted my gaze from the cup, I caught Marcy's eyes. He was staring straight at me, lips tilted upward in a half smile. It wasn't friendly. It was knowing, as if he were testing whether I'd take the bait. Elrina glanced between us, then quickly looked down at her plate, her mouth curving into a small complicit smile. It was the kind of smile siblings share when mocking the odd one out. Only this time, it wasn't harmless teasing. It was exclusion, deliberate and cold. My mother laughed lightly and reached for Marcy's arm. "You see, this is what family looks like. Reliable, dependable. Not everyone understands that." Her words, though directed at him, were designed to hit me squarely. I pushed the cup slightly away from me, resting my spoon beside it. My mother's eyes darted to the movement, narrowing briefly, but she said nothing. It wasn't a family dinner, I thought, my jaw tightening. It was a performance, and I was the villain in their play. I sat back and let silence become my companion. I stirred the cup again, a small, deliberate gesture, though I had no intention of drinking. Every move was a strategy, not hesitation. Silence, I reminded myself, was armor. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. I'd heard that phrase once from a mentor at work, and it had lived inside me ever since. Tonight, it felt truer than ever. Marcy leaned in closer to my sister, whispering something that made her giggle behind her hand. His eyes cut back to me mid-laugh, ensuring I'd witnessed their private amusement. I gave no reaction. Inside, I thought of my father, his quiet strength in the face of my mother's dominance. I remembered his voice telling me once, "Don't let them rewrite your worth." He had meant it about work then, but it fit here too. If I gave in, if I drank, if I let their narrative bind me, I would lose more than my pride. So I let my hand rest calmly against the table. The cup remained full. My mother sighed heavily, impatience dripping from her tone. "Drink up, Azaria. It's getting cold." Marcy went to such trouble making it special. That word, special, cut deeper than she realized. Her gaze flicked toward me again, and I noticed Marcy's eyes shift quickly back to the cup, like a director checking if the actor would follow the script. My chest tightened. Every smile at this table, every glance, every word, it all carried a secret I wasn't meant to uncover, yet I could feel it pressing against me. I kept my expression neutral, letting them believe I was simply stalling. But inside, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't just coffee, it was a test, and I was about to learn what it would cost me if I failed. That night, I lay awake, my body stiff against the mattress, eyes tracing the cracks on the ceiling that had probably been there for years but suddenly felt like fissures widening above me. The smell of the coffee wouldn't leave. I had washed my hands 3 times, brushed my teeth twice, and still, the faint bitterness lingered in my senses. The steam had carried something with it, something sharp enough to cut into my peace. I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep to dull it, but instead, the weight of silence pressed harder. Silence wasn't peace. It had become weight. Every word spoken at that table hours earlier clung to me, and with it came the voices of the past, ones I thought I'd buried. Memories began to resurface, uninvited, relentless. They broke through the walls I'd built, crashing in like unwelcome guests. I turned to my side, the glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, making stripes of light and shadow across the room. It was too late to escape the past. My mother's insult, the mocking smiles, the almond-scented warning, it all opened the door to what I had kept locked away. I was 8 when I first overheard it. My mother's voice drifted down the hallway while she spoke with a neighbor by the front porch. "Elrena is such a blessing," she said, her tone full of pride. Then came the sharp edge. "Azaria, well, she's more of a burden, always demanding, never satisfied." The words pierced me even then. I had stood frozen, clutching a book to my chest, unable to move until the neighbor left and the door shut. I never told anyone, never asked her if she meant it, because deep down, I knew she did. Years later, in middle school, when I won a state essay contest, the memory returned. We were at the ceremony, my certificate in hand, the judge shaking my palm. I scanned the crowd for her approval, but when my mother finally spoke, she dismissed it. "It's luck, really. Elrena works hard, but Azaria, she just gets lucky sometimes." The sting was sharper than the applause was sweet. I still remember Elrena's small, triumphant smile, as if she had inherited my achievement too. The comment, the smile, the dismissal, those formed the scar that never fully healed. It explained why hearing "ungrateful brat" tonight tore through me so easily. It wasn't new, it was the echo of decades. "Sticks and stones may break bones, but words, they linger," my professor once quoted to us. That line had stayed in my memory longer than most equations, because it was truer than anything in the textbooks. The next memory arrived with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie. It was a Thanksgiving in my late teens. I had stepped out for a moment, camera in hand, to grab extra batteries. When I returned, the family photo had already been taken. I remember standing in the doorway, breathless from hurrying back, expecting to slide into place. Instead, I found them rearranging chairs, laughter filling the room. "You weren't ready anyway," my mother said dismissively, waving me off when I asked why they hadn't waited. Elrina squeezed into the center beside Brielle, smiling at the camera like she was the crown jewel of the family. The picture hung in the hallway for years afterward, framed and polished. I was absent, erased from the narrative with the push of a shutter button. That's when I realized, in their story, I was always optional. Tonight's dinner table felt like that photo all over again, me left out, invisible, while the others posed for approval in the spotlight of my mother's favor. The coffee, the insult, the mocking glances, they were just the newest frame in the gallery of exclusion. I shifted under the covers, gripping the pillow as my anger stirred. All those moments I had swallowed, all the silence I had kept, it had never erased the scars. It had only layered them, one atop another, until they were too heavy to ignore. I whispered into the dark, my voice steady, though no one could hear. If invisibility is their gift to me, maybe it will be my weapon against them. The thought surprised me, but the more I rolled it over in my mind, the clearer it became. They thought I was powerless because they didn't see me. But being unseen had its uses. People reveal more when they think you're irrelevant. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to plead. I would use what they overlooked to my advantage. I would turn their dismissal into my armor. I won't drink their poison, literal or otherwise. I sat up, my decision sharp in the quiet. The room felt smaller, but my resolve had grown. Tomorrow would not be another day of swallowing silence. Something was shifting inside me, and I could no longer ignore it. By morning, I knew I had to confront them, or lose myself entirely. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when I finally dragged myself out of bed. My eyes were heavy, my body sluggish from a night of tossing and turning, but it wasn't fatigue that weighed on me. It was the smell that had haunted me all night. The bitter almond tang of that coffee seemed stitched into my senses. I had dreamed of it, woken with it in my nose, and now it followed me down the hallway as if it had seeped into the walls of the house. When I entered the dining room, the family was already gathered around the table. The clatter of forks against plates, the polite laughter, the casual chatter. It was as though last night hadn't happened. As if the insult, the mocking smiles, the unspoken warning in the cup had evaporated with the dawn. My mother sat at the head, radiant in her authority, passing toast as though she were the benevolent queen of a realm she alone controlled. I sat down quietly, studying them all. The smiles looked too bright, the tone too sweet, like syrup hiding poison. They could cut you with kindness and call it love, I thought, watching the choreography of their togetherness. Every move was rehearsed, every word sharpened beneath its coating. It didn't take long for the knife to come out. Brielle set her cup down with a deliberate clink, turning toward me with that calm fury she wore like perfume. "You've always embarrassed this family, Azaria," she said, her voice steady, as though she were reciting a fact. "Never measuring up, never knowing your place. You make us all look small." The words stung, though I had braced myself. I caught Elrina's smirk across the table, delicate and smug, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Beside her, Marcy let out a low chuckle, feigning surprise at my supposed incompetence, but betraying his delight in the attack. I steadied my breathing. Anger burned through my chest, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing it spill. I thought of an American phrase that had carried me before: "Don't ever let anyone make you ashamed of your own story." "I'm not ashamed," I said evenly, my fork poised but untouched. "My life may not fit your script, but it's still mine." The table fell quiet for a moment. My mother's eyes narrowed, Elrina shifted uncomfortably, and Marcy sipped his juice with the arrogance of a man who believed he already owned the narrative. "You don't even hear yourself," Brielle replied, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. Always defensive, always selfish. Even as a child, you were a disappointment. Elrina laughed softly, hiding it behind her napkin. But I caught it. Marcy leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth tugged upward in amusement. It felt like a staged attack, like they had rehearsed this together before I walked in. My anger pressed harder, but I kept my tone calm. What embarrasses this family is not me, I said slowly. It's the lies we tell ourselves to keep pretending this is love. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind was enough to bruise. When I thought the worst had passed, the next blow came disguised as casual conversation. Oh, by the way, Brielle said lightly, buttering her toast. I went ahead and removed your name from the savings account yesterday. It didn't make sense for you to be on it. You don't need it. You've contributed nothing. Her words were delivered with the same tone one might use to announce the weather. Yet for me, it was a storm. I froze. Financial erasure, that was different. Emotional cuts I could brace for, but this was deliberate theft of existence, a rewriting of records. Marcy nodded along, his voice rich with false reason. It's only fair, Brielle. Elrina and I carry the load. Azaria doesn't need to be tied to the finances. It just complicates things. My eyes locked on him, steady but burning. He spoke as if I weren't even in the room, as if I had already been erased from the ledger of this family. Shock rippled through me first, cold and paralyzing, then rage followed, hot and dangerous. But I pressed it down, channeling it into silence. I thought again of wisdom I had heard once. Money talks, but silence records. I etched every word into my memory, every smirk, every tone, every dismissal. This wasn't a breakfast conversation, it was evidence. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam my hands on the table or shout. That's what they expected, and I wouldn't give it to them. Instead, I chewed my bread slowly, observed their moves, memorized their expressions. My quiet was my defense, but also my weapon. They thought they erased me, I told myself silently, the words steady in my chest. But you can't erase someone who refuses to disappear. In that moment, I knew my strategy. I would not win this fight with outbursts or pleas. I would win it with patience, with evidence, with the cold precision they underestimated in me. They had written me out, but I would rewrite myself back in, with truth as ink and silence as paper. When the meal ended, I rose from the table, smoothing my napkin with a smile faint enough to be mistaken for compliance. I caught the flicker of unease in Brielle's eyes as I did. Marcy glanced up, confused at my calm. Elrina avoided my gaze. I walked away with nothing in my hands, but everything in my mind. They mistook silence for defeat, I thought as I stepped out of the room. They'll regret that. That was the morning I decided to dig deeper, and what I found would change everything. That afternoon dragged like a stone across my chest. After the confrontation at breakfast, I retreated to the small corner of the house I had carved out for myself, a makeshift office with a desk pressed against the window and a lamp whose bulb flickered when the wind rattled the glass. My laptop waited for me there, the last piece of control I had in this house. I tried to focus on my work, but the air felt different, charged somehow, as though everyone else had silently agreed on a script I wasn't allowed to read. Elrina drifted past the hallway once, her eyes skimming me without pause, as though I were a stranger renting space in her childhood home. She didn't greet me, didn't even flinch. Marcy, on the other hand, walked through with his shoulders squared and a smirk pulling at his mouth, like a man satisfied that the play was unfolding exactly as he had planned. Their silence wasn't peace, it was coordination, and every cell in my body told me I was the target. I tried to settle into my work, but the restlessness pressed down harder. Something was coming. I could feel it. I didn't have to wait long. Later, as I made my way toward the staircase, Marcy stepped into the hallway like he had been waiting. His expression was calm, too calm, as though he had rehearsed every line. He leaned in just enough for only me to hear. Some people, he said softly, his voice flat, stripped of any warmth, are better off disappearing before they ruin things. He didn't blink. He didn't frown. The words slid out with no emotion, and that made them terrifying. There was no passion, no anger, just certainty. I held his gaze, forcing my face into stillness. "Is that supposed to be advice?" I asked, my voice even. "Call it a warning," he replied, straightening his jacket as if we had just exchanged pleasantries. Then he brushed past me, humming a tune like nothing had happened. I stood there, the air gone cold against my skin. Fear shot through me, sharp and precise, but clarity followed close behind. He had shown me exactly what I needed to know. An old saying floated to mind. When people tell you who they are, don't argue, just listen. I had listened, and I would remember. By late afternoon, I forced myself back into my office. I thought diving into work would steady me, but when I opened my laptop, the unease returned tenfold. Something was off. Files I had saved just days earlier were missing. Drafts of a project I'd been working on were gone, entire folders empty. At first I thought it was an error, maybe a glitch in the system. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Someone had been in my computer. Emails deleted, spreadsheets altered, even client notes missing. My pulse quickened as I checked the history log. The timestamps made my stomach twist. It had been accessed while I was downstairs at breakfast. I sat back slowly, every nerve alive. My mind flashed back to last week, when I caught my mother hovering near the laptop. She'd claimed she was looking for a notepad, but her hands had lingered near the keyboard too long. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was sabotage. They weren't satisfied with cutting me down at the table. They wanted to erase me from the world I had built outside these walls. A truth I had heard once echoed in my mind. In America, they say money leaves a trail. So do lies. And here was my trail. My records tampered with, my career under threat. Shock settled over me first, then hardened into something else. Determination. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred into the glow. It wasn't just about the insults anymore. It wasn't about ungrateful or embarrassment. This was erasure. They weren't just silencing me at the table, I thought, hands tightening on the edge of the desk. They were trying to erase me from the world I built. I drew a slow breath, steadying myself. I couldn't afford a rash reaction. No yelling, no accusations without proof. I needed to be methodical, careful. If they wanted me invisible, then invisibility could be my cover. The plan began to form quietly in my head. I would document everything, every conversation, every threat, every missing file. Evidence, not emotion, would be my weapon. That night, before heading to bed, I placed my laptop in a drawer and turned the key with deliberate care. Beside it, I slid in a backup drive I had prepared, copies of everything they thought they could steal. I whispered into the still air of my office. I didn't know it yet, but I was already building my case against them. By evening, the house had grown quiet again, but not with peace, more like the hush before a storm. I walked down the hall toward my father's old study, my hand grazing the wallpaper, worn smooth from years of family hands. Marcy's words from earlier clung to me like smoke. Some people are better off disappearing. His threat combined with the tampered laptop left no doubt that silence would cost me everything. If I wanted answers, I had to find them myself. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a wave of nostalgia rushed in. The study smelled of leather-bound books and dust, faint hints of pipe tobacco that lingered even years after my father's passing. The light from the setting sun fell across the desk, where he had spent countless nights, his meticulous notes still filling the margins of legal journals. I could almost hear his voice telling me, "Paper trails never lie, Azaria. Follow them." I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, letting the solitude settle. This room had always been a refuge, a place where truth lived in neat stacks of files and handwritten letters. Tonight, it felt like the only safe ground left. I pulled journals off the shelves, running my fingers along the spines. Dust clung to my hands, but I didn't care. Something told me the answers I needed weren't in plain sight. My father never left important things exposed. He was a man who believed in tucking away proof where only the careful would look. After nearly an hour of searching, my hand brushed against a stiff edge in the back of a thick law book. Heart pounding, I eased it free. An envelope, yellowed and sealed with my father's careful hand. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was an older version of his will. My breath caught. His handwriting named me, not Elrina, not Marcy, as a rightful heir. Every line of the document spoke to his intent, his recognition of my worth, of my place in this family. The weight of betrayal pressed down as realization hit me. My mother had hidden this, replacing it with a newer version that stripped me of my rights. I sank into the chair at his desk, staring at the words that validated what I had always suspected. They erased my name on paper, but not in his intent. A saying I once heard from a legal mentor floated back: "Possession isn't ownership, proof is." I now held proof in my hands. Betrayal burned hot, but beneath it grew relief. My father had not forgotten me. Empowerment filled the cracks where hurt had lived for years. Driven by adrenaline, I searched deeper. I pulled open desk drawers, rifling through old receipts, notes, and stray keys. Then I found it. A folded piece of paper wedged beneath a pile of envelopes. It was a receipt from a chemical supply store. The name printed on it made my stomach clench. Marcy Noir. The items listed weren't harmless supplies. They were substances tied to poisoning. My mind snapped back to that night at dinner, the bitter almond scent rising from the cup my mother had pressed into my hands. It all aligned. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't imagination. I was holding hard evidence. I read the date on the receipt. It matched the week I had fallen violently ill months ago, an illness the doctor had brushed off as food poisoning. My throat tightened and my hands trembled, but this time with fury more than fear. I folded the receipt carefully, sliding it into my file folder. This was no longer a family spat. This was attempted murder. The devil is in the details, and details win cases. Another American wisdom I had once scoffed at, now ringing with truth. The details were here. My inheritance erased, my life threatened, my trust shattered. I sat back in my father's leather chair, clutching the will in one hand and the receipt in the other. The weight of both documents steadied me. "They think I'm the silent one," I whispered into the empty study, "but silence is where truth gathers its sharpest teeth." I outlined my next steps mentally. Copy the documents, store them outside the house, document everything that followed. I could no longer survive by staying quiet. I had to prepare, and every move from here would have to be deliberate. The determination settled cold and steady in me, stronger than anger. I would not confront them yet, not until my case was ironclad. I slid both documents into a secure folder and tucked it beneath my arm. As I reached for the light switch, I whispered to myself, "This house tried to bury me. Now I'll bury their lies." But before I could step into the hallway, a floorboard creaked. Footsteps. Someone was out there, moving closer. I froze, folder pressed against my chest. Had they heard me searching? Did they know what I had found? The doorknob rattled once, lightly, as if tested. My pulse roared in my ears. I came downstairs after locking the folder away in my room. My hands still tingled from holding those documents, the hidden will, the receipt with Marcy's name. But my face revealed nothing. In the living room, the family gathered around the television as if we were a portrait of domestic peace. Brielle sat in her favorite chair, the knitted blanket draped neatly across her lap. Elrina curled on the couch beside Marcy, who flipped idly through channels, his arm draped possessively across the backrest. The scene looked normal to an outsider, maybe even warm. To me, it felt staged. The chatter was shallow, the laughter thin, the smiles stretched too wide. The silence between words was heavier than the words themselves. Families are like fudge, mostly sweet, with a few nuts, I thought bitterly, watching the way they avoided looking at me for too long. It was performance, and I was the audience they wanted to fool. I took a seat at the edge of the sofa, feeling the weight of their watchful calm. My suspicions stayed sharp. They weren't done. After a few minutes, Brielle turned to me, her eyes shining with a false tenderness that never reached her tone. She held out a small amber bottle. "You look pale, Azaria." "Weak. Take one of these," she said softly, as though she were offering love in pill form. "You need to build your strength." I stared at the bottle, its label peeled away, leaving only a blank surface. She twisted off the cap and shook a pill into her palm, pressing it toward me. Elrina shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking to the floor, then away, as though she couldn't bear to watch. "I don't need it," I said carefully, my voice calm. Brielle's smile hardened at the edges. "Nonsense. It's just a vitamin. One pill won't kill you." The phrasing tightened around me like a noose. My fingers brushed hers as I took it, the small white tablet light but heavy with meaning. I held it a moment, then lifted it toward my mouth, only to let it fall discreetly into my sleeve when no one watched. "See?" Brielle said brightly, her voice too loud. "That's better." Inside, my thoughts cut sharper. Care comes easy when it's only a mask. Real care never needs proof. My heartbeat pounded, but I forced my body to stay steady, my expression neutral. Later, when the TV hummed low and the air seemed to settle, Marcy rose from his seat. He crossed the room with a casual swagger, then lowered himself beside me on the couch. Before I could step away, his arm slipped around my shoulder. To anyone else, it looked like a gesture of comfort, a brother-in-law offering support. To me, it felt suffocating. His breath was hot against my ear as he whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. "Don't fight. You won't win." I didn't flinch. I let my body remain still beneath the weight of his arm, the picture of compliance. To my mother and sister, it must have looked like affection. To me, it was a leash. I turned my head slightly, keeping my voice so soft that only he would catch it. "Funny," I murmured. "You mistake silence for surrender." His grip tightened for a moment, just enough to press the warning deeper into my skin. Then he pulled away, smiling as if nothing had happened. Elrina glanced at us, but when I caught her eye, she quickly looked away. My stomach churned with disgust. Rage pulsed under my skin, yet with it came strength. The moment revealed more than Marcy intended. His threat wasn't bravado. It was fear disguised as control. When the house quieted again, I sat in my corner of the sofa, thoughts moving fast and sharp. They were escalating. What had begun as words at the dining table had shifted to pills, to whispered warnings, to arms masquerading as embraces. If they wanted war, they'd get it. But it wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical. I began cataloging every detail in my mind, the pill in my sleeve, the way Elrina couldn't meet my eyes, the smug calm in Marcy's voice, the too bright tone in my mother's. Each moment would be stored, each piece of evidence gathered. I had no choice. This wasn't survival anymore. It was preparation. My father's words from years ago returned to me, steady and clear. Follow the paper trail, Azaria. That's where truth lives. Tonight, the trail wasn't just paper. It was pills, whispers, smirks, and silences. And I would follow it all. Excusing myself with a smile I didn't feel, I slipped upstairs to my room. My hands tightened around the hidden pill in my sleeve as I closed the door behind me. From my drawer, I pulled out the folder with the will and the poison receipt. I placed the tablet beside them on the desk, staring at the pattern forming in front of me. The mask was cracking, I whispered. And soon, everyone would see what hid beneath. The following Sunday evening, the family gathered again in the dining room. The table was set with polished silver and china plates, the kind my mother only brought out for appearances. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and a basket of bread filled the air with warmth, but the atmosphere was anything but comforting. The smiles around me were too fixed, the laughter too bright, and beneath it all lay a silence sharp enough to cut. I sat in my usual chair, the end of the table, their chosen place for me. They made polite conversation about Elrina's new dress, Marcy's recent business success, and the weather, as though last week's pill incident hadn't happened. My mother's voice rose above the hum, cheery, almost gleeful, and yet my gut told me this was nothing more than the calm before the storm. After dinner, plates had been cleared. Brielle appeared from the kitchen, holding a tray with steaming cups. "Coffee for everyone," she said sweetly, setting one directly in front of me. Her eyes lingered on mine with that cold insistence I knew too well. "You look tired, Azaria. Drink. It will do you good." I didn't move at first, only studied the cup. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcy glance toward it, his gaze fixed, waiting. That was all I needed to confirm my suspicion. Slowly, I wrapped my hand around the cup, lifting it as if ready to drink. Then, as I reached for the napkin beside me, I performed a subtle exchange. In one practiced motion, I slid my cup toward Marcy's place while nudging his untouched cup closer to me. The switch was seamless, hidden beneath the shuffle of hands passing sugar and spoons. Inside, my voice was clear. They wanted me to swallow defeat. Instead, I handed it back. My mother beamed across the table. "That's better," she said, mistaking my compliance for surrender. Marcy raised his cup without hesitation, bringing it to his lips. He sipped deeply, not noticing the change. I lowered my eyes to mask the flicker of triumph sparking inside me. Minutes passed. Conversation drifted toward mundane topics. Elrina talking about redecorating the guest room, Brielle praising Marcy's discipline, the ticking clock marking every second like a drumbeat in my chest. Then I saw it. Marcy's hand shook slightly as he set down the cup. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He shifted in his chair, adjusting his collar, his face growing pale. Elrina touched his arm. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he muttered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He tried to steady his breathing, but within moments his fingers trembled more violently. Brielle's brows knitted. "Marcy, you look ill. What's wrong?" I sat still, my own cup untouched. Every second dragged like a lifetime. I didn't flinch. Marcy coughed, reaching for water, but the glass rattled in his grip and spilled across the table. The laughter died. The air shifted from false cheer to raw panic. As Marcy bent forward, his breath ragged, words slipped from his mouth, slurred, uncontrolled. "You promised. She'd be gone by now, Brielle." The room fell silent. Elrina froze, her hand still hovering near him. My mother's face drained of color, her lips parting but no words forming. I kept my eyes on Marcy, waiting, letting the confession settle like a thunderclap. "Gone," he rasped again, clutching at the edge of the table. "You said the coffee would—" His voice cracked into a cough. No one moved. The weight of truth was heavier than the silence. I leaned back slowly, letting my calm speak louder than their chaos. Truth has a way of spilling out, like poison in a cup. Brielle's hand shook as she reached toward Marcy, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes flicked to me, searching, panicked, as though I had pulled the strings. But I didn't need to speak. Marcy had already spoken for me. The table was a battlefield now. Elrina whispered frantically, "Mother, what is he talking about?" Brielle's voice snapped back, sharp, desperate. "He doesn't know what he's saying." But we all knew he did. I wrapped my hands around my cup, the one that should have been mine but wasn't, and lifted it calmly to my lips. I didn't drink, only inhaled the harmless steam rising from it. It wasn't just coffee on that table. It was the truth, boiling over. The room exploded into chaos as Marcy collapsed, his chair screeching across the wooden floor and crashing backward. Elrina cried out, rushing to his side, her hands fluttering helplessly as she tried to steady him. Brielle stood frozen, her face pale, eyes darting between me and Marcy, lips parting but no sound escaping. I didn't move. I sat still, my coffee untouched in front of me, my pulse steady. I narrated the chaos silently in my mind, as though I were an outsider watching actors stumble off script. "Call 911!" Elrina shouted, her voice shrill with panic. But Brielle hesitated, her hands clutched against her chest. She didn't reach for the phone, she didn't shout for help. She just stared at me, as though paralyzed by a truth she couldn't control anymore. Panic makes people show who they really are, I thought, and I saw them for exactly who they were. Elrina, the loyal daughter who would rather protect her husband than face reality. Brielle, the matriarch who cared more about appearances than life itself. And me, the one who refused to flinch, even as the walls of their story came crashing down. The shouting grew louder. In the scramble, Brielle's handbag spilled from the chair she had set it on. Papers scattered across the floor, fluttering like white flags of surrender. My eyes caught the bold print of property deeds, legal forms, transfers of ownership. I bent down slowly, picking up one of the documents while the others screamed over Marcy's failing breath. My eyes scanned the text. The deed to the family house, transferred quietly into Elrina's and Marcy's names. Another sheet, the savings account, already shifted. You weren't just trying to erase me at this table, I said calmly, standing with the papers in hand. My voice cut through the noise. You were erasing me from his legacy. Brielle's head snapped toward me, her composure cracking. It was for the good of the family, she barked, her voice trembling. You wouldn't understand. The good of the family? My grip tightened on the deed. You mean the family you've rewritten to exclude me? She stepped forward, eyes blazing. Everything I've done has been to protect what's ours. But I remembered my father's words, spoken in this very room long ago. A will speaks louder than living lies. I lifted the papers higher, letting the truth show itself. For the first time, Brielle's voice faltered. The front door rattled with a knock. All heads turned. Elrina froze, her hand still clamped around Marcy's wrist. Brielle's eyes widened, fear finally surfacing. The door opened, and Corinne Finch, our neighbor, stepped inside cautiously. She had heard the shouting, her lined face pale but resolute. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice steady despite the tension. Brielle forced a smile that looked grotesque in the dim light. Corinne, this is family business. Please, go home. But Corinne shook her head, standing straighter. No, I've kept quiet long enough. Her eyes met mine before returning to Brielle. Weeks ago, I overheard you and Marcy in the yard. You said she, Corinne pointed to me, didn't deserve the house or the name. I heard you say you'd fix that. The silence that followed was suffocating. Brielle snapped, her voice sharp. You're a nosy old woman. You don't know what you heard. But Corinne didn't flinch. I know what I heard, and I know lies when I hear them. For the first time, I felt the ground tilt in my favor. This wasn't just my word against theirs. This was validation, spoken aloud. The walls have ears, and sometimes they have neighbors. I stayed quiet, letting Corinne's testimony fill the space. My mother's shoulders hunched, Elrina's face drained of color, and Marcy groaned on the floor, his body betraying him as much as his words had. I didn't shout victory. I didn't need to. I sat back down, my papers neatly stacked in front of me, and folded my hands. Silence isn't surrender. Tonight, it was my weapon. I let the weight of Corinne's words press against them. I let Brielle squirm under the gaze of a witness she couldn't silence. Every second of my quiet felt louder than their years of shouting me down. In the distance, faint but growing, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights flickered against the window panes, moving closer. I lifted my head and locked eyes with my mother. She stared back, her mask of control shattered, her fear raw. Justice wasn't just coming, I thought. It was already here. The sirens grew louder until red and blue lights painted the walls of the dining room. Officers entered swiftly, followed by paramedics who immediately knelt beside Marcy, their voices clipped and urgent as they checked his pulse. Elrina threw herself between them and her husband, her hands shaking as she tried to shield him from their reach. He's fine. He just needs water, she insisted, but her voice cracked under the strain. Brielle pushed forward, her tone rehearsed, trying to claim control. It was an accident, she told the officers. A misunderstanding. He must have eaten something bad earlier. This family has had enough trouble without outsiders meddling. I stayed in my chair, calm in the middle of their frenzy. My eyes tracked every movement, every lie spoken with too much haste. The louder the lie, the quicker it unravels, I thought, and I knew we had reached that unraveling. The officers weren't convinced. They spread out across the room, asking questions, scribbling notes. One of them glanced at me, but I offered nothing yet. My calmness made Brielle fidget more than the chaos surrounding her. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the edges of the folded paper, my father's letter, the older will he had written before Brielle buried it under lies. It had become my anchor in the storm, proof that I wasn't invisible in his eyes. I rose slowly, the room's noise dimming as I unfolded the letter. This was my father's, I said, my voice steady. He trusted me with his words, and his words matter more than your revisions. The handwriting glowed under the dining light, familiar and firm, his wish that I remain a rightful heir. My chest tightened as I read aloud the part that named me, his recognition of my place in the family. The sound of his words carried me, stronger than I had felt in years. Trust your instincts, Azaria. Don't let them silence you. His voice echoed in my memory, a whisper that steadied me now. This wasn't just legal evidence, it was my emotional lifeline. With each word, I felt the years of dismissal peel away. For the first time, I wasn't defending myself. I was standing in the truth my father had left me. Brielle lunged for control, her voice sharp. "She's unstable," she cried to the officers. "She made this up to shame us. She's always been jealous, always looking for ways to tear this family down." I looked at her, then at the officers, and slid another document onto the table. The poison receipt with Marcy's name scrawled across the top. "Unstable?" I said evenly. "Or prepared. This is the evidence you tried to bury." The room shifted. Control no longer sat in Brielle's hands. It was mine. The officers leaned forward, scanning the documents, their pens moving quickly. The reversal was complete. For years, I had been painted as the outsider, the unstable one. Tonight, their accusations cracked wide open, and the accusers became the accused. Elrina's face drained of color, her hand trembling where it still rested on Marcy's arm. He groaned weakly, unable to cover for her this time. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the scratch of pens on police notebooks. Vindication surged in my chest. For the first time, my words carried weight beyond these walls. But Brielle wasn't finished. Desperation twisted her face as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "She poisoned him! Arrest her! Don't you see? She's been planning this!" The officers hesitated, their eyes narrowing, weighing her words against the evidence spread across the table. I didn't flinch. I reached into the folder and placed the pill bottle beside the receipt. Its rattle against the wood echoed louder than any of Brielle's accusations. "This," I said, "was given to me by her." She called them vitamins. The officer nearest to me picked it up, turning it over, his jaw tightening. And then Corinne Finch, my neighbor, stepped forward from where she had lingered near the door. Her voice was steady, her presence unshakable. "I heard them," she said firmly. "Weeks ago, in the yard. They said she didn't deserve the house or the name. They said they'd fix that." Brielle's face crumpled, the color draining. "She's lying." "No," Corinne cut in, her eyes locked on the officer. "I know what I heard. I've lived next door long enough to recognize deceit when I hear it." The attempt to frame me collapsed under the weight of her testimony. The trap they had set snapped shut. But on them. The officers began gathering the documents, photographing the evidence, speaking in low tones into their radios. Two of them moved toward Brielle and Marcy. I sat back down, my hands folded in my lap, calm. The storm had shifted entirely. Satisfaction mingled with relief, though anger still simmered beneath it all. They had tried to erase me, they had tried to kill me, but their lies had been exposed under the very roof they thought they controlled. Elrina stood frozen, her body rigid, lips pressed tight, as if silence could shield her from consequence. When the officers finally led Brielle and Marcy toward the door for questioning, the room was drenched in silence. I lifted my gaze, meeting my mother's eyes one last time before she disappeared behind the officers. "They thought they could silence me with poison," I whispered to myself. But poison has a way of revealing the truth. The house felt different after Brielle and Marcy were escorted out. The silence was thick, the kind that presses into your chest and makes you aware of every creak in the floorboards. For years, the structure of this family had been held together by my mother's iron grip and Marcy's willingness to play her accomplice. With them gone, it was as if the roof sagged, the walls leaned, and everything they had built out of control and manipulation collapsed overnight. Elrina moved through the house like a shadow. She avoided me at first, passing through rooms without a word, her expression a mask of forced calm. But I could see her hands tremble when she thought no one was watching. She tried to act blameless, yet the cracks in her facade betrayed her. I sat in the study one afternoon, going over the documents I had already turned over to the police, when I heard her footsteps pause at the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, trying to summon authority she no longer had. When the tree falls, I said quietly, not looking up, the monkeys scatter. It was an old saying, and it fit too perfectly. She flinched. Finally, she spoke, her voice sharper than usual. Do you have any idea what you've done, Azaria? You've torn this family apart. I set the papers down slowly, meeting her gaze. No, Elrina, I didn't tear anything apart. I revealed what was already broken. She pushed away from the doorframe and stepped into the room, her voice rising. Mother only did what she thought was best. You act like she was a monster, but she wanted to protect us, protect what was ours. I laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Best for you, maybe. Never for me. Her face twisted. You're always the victim, always pointing fingers. Maybe if you had tried harder. I cut her off with a steady voice. Don't mistake survival for weakness. I refuse to play a game that was rigged against me. That doesn't make me guilty of tearing anything down. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. I stood, closing the folder of papers with care. I won't carry the guilt you're trying to hand me. That's not my burden anymore. The tension between us lingered like smoke, but I felt lighter. Frustration had shifted into liberation. Days later, the phone rang. I answered, expecting a call from the attorney handling my father's estate, but the voice on the other end stopped me cold. It was Brielle, her tone sharp even from custody. Ungrateful brat, she hissed. You ruined everything. For years, those words would have cut me to pieces, but now, something inside me clicked into place. My voice was steady, my retort sharp. Ungrateful? No, I said. I'm the only one left who remembers gratitude. Gratitude for truth, for survival, for him. I meant my father. His memory was the anchor she could never erase. The line went silent for a beat. I imagined her face, the fury at losing the power she had wielded so easily. That final retort wasn't just words, it was a severing. The grip she had on me all my life snapped in that moment, and I was free. Breaking free wasn't only emotional, it had to be practical too. I met with the attorney, handed over every document, every receipt, every file I had saved. Slowly, piece by piece, my father's estate began to take shape again under my name. There was pain in every step. Sorting through papers that reminded me of his absence, seeing the lines of handwriting that carried his voice into the present, it hurt. But I chose not to let the pain define me. Family is supposed to lift you up, I reminded myself as I left the courthouse one morning. When they don't, you learn to stand taller on your own. I began planning for the future, repairs to the house. A return to my own work without fear of tampered files, nights without the weight of poisoned cups or pills disguised as vitamins. For the first time in years, I felt forward motion instead of retreat. One evening, I sat at my desk in the study. The old coffee cup was there, the same one that had nearly ended me. Beside it lay the will, crisp under the lamplight. I placed them side by side deliberately. The cup was no longer a weapon, no longer a threat. It was a reminder. I survived. I leaned back in the chair, my breath steady. Survival had carried me here, but I knew it was only the beginning of living. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and nerves. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I entered, eyes following me, whispers swirling in the air. This wasn't just my family's scandal anymore. It belonged to the whole town. The gallery filled quickly. Neighbors who'd seen the flashing lights that night, colleagues who once doubted me, strangers who came for the spectacle. At the front, Brielle and Marcy stood together, but the power they once exuded had drained from their faces. Marcy's skin looked sallow under the fluorescent lights, his shoulders hunched, his bravado gone. Brielle still held her chin high, but her hands twitched, betraying nerves she could no longer control. The prosecution's voice rang steady, recounting the charges: attempted poisoning, conspiracy, fraud. Each detail was laid bare: the tampered will, the pill bottle, the receipt in Marcy's name. As I listened, my stomach tightened. The facts were my shield, but hearing them spoken aloud made me relive every moment: the coffee smell, the pills in my sleeve, Marcy's whisper at my ear. Justice may be slow, the prosecutor said, but it never forgets. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting those words settle. When it was her turn, Brielle rose, straightening the suit jacket she had chosen as armor. Her voice cut through the courtroom. "Ungrateful brat," she spat, her eyes fixed on me. "You've always been ungrateful. Now you've dragged us through the mud. You betrayed your family for attention, for money, for revenge." Murmurs rippled through the room. I stood, every step measured, my father's letter folded neatly in my hand. My voice was calm, but it carried. "No, I didn't betray family. I exposed strangers who wore the mask of family. There's a difference." The judge's gavel struck once for silence, but the impact had already landed. Brielle's face faltered, her words stolen by the weight of truth. A vindication surged through me, not loud or triumphant, but steady, grounding. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defending myself from her words. I was defining myself despite them. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. Of conspiracy. Of attempted poisoning. Of fraud. The words struck like a bell tolling, final and resonant. Marcy broke first, his body crumbling as he turned toward Elrina. "Say something," he begged, his voice raw, pleading. But Elrina stayed silent, her eyes fixed forward, her loyalty evaporated under the weight of evidence. Brielle erupted in fury, lunging against the bailiff's hold. "This is her fault!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "Azaria, you destroyed us!" I watched her being dragged away, her face twisted in rage. The woman who silenced me ended her life shouting into a void. The irony cut deep but clean. Weeks later, I returned to my father's study. The trial was over, the estate secured. The shadows in the house were lighter, but echoes lingered. I set the old coffee cup on my desk beside the will, the two objects that told the story of everything I had endured. I traced the rim of the cup, no longer afraid of what it might hold. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a reminder. I had survived the poison, the lies, the manipulation. I rebuilt my days slowly, repairing the house, reviving my career, reconnecting with the self I had nearly lost. Pain remained, but it had become fuel. I promised myself I would fight for others who had been silenced, who carried scars from words and betrayals they couldn't name. Being strong doesn't mean you never break, I thought. It means you rebuild every time you do. The thought didn't just comfort me, it propelled me. That evening, I brewed myself a simple cup of coffee. No one to hand it to me, no eyes watching, no hidden intent. I lifted it slowly, breathing in the steam. "They called me ungrateful," I whispered, steady and unshaken. "But gratitude is not obedience, it's honoring truth, and truth at last is mine." I sipped, savoring the taste. Because survival was never the end of my story, it was only the beginning.